Okay. Hey, welcome everybody. It's the Full Quadrant podcast again. I'm Jason and I got my co-host Michael here with us. How's it going, Mike?
We're back for another
Back,
episode. It's been
back.
a little bit though.
We almost died in
Been
the
busy. I think the heat slowed us down, especially here.
Oh man. Yeah. I'm curious to know. So with your dogs, like your personal dogs that are in the house, and you're clearly limited by the amount of time you can stay outside throughout the day. Like, how are you managing their like you have cabin fever in the winter where you're stuck inside. You kind of have like this summer heat that keeps you inside as well. Like how are you managing that for your dogs?
It's it's ball in the morning when it's cooler, and then if it during the day when it's hot, I have because I have the air conditioning in my garage, and I have a slat mill and a treadmill, and then the bite box. So I'll just go in the garage and get their frustrations out that way. Put them on the treadmill just to for 30 minutes or so, and then I might put them on a slat mill to do sprinting,
Gotcha.
and then some bite work in the bite box. So yeah, I get them what they need,
Yeah.
even with the heat.
No, I was just more asking, like, what are you doing? Like, what exercises can you do inside that help balance the dogs out and help kind of keep them satisfied?
Yeah, I used to do like searching too,
Like
for
little
like
object searches.
originally it was just a magnet with just my scent that I would put in different places in the garage, and I'd go find it. But I just bought a bunch of the bricks with the holes in them
Oh,
to set up a little wall for scent work.
nice.
So that'll be good.
That's fun. Yeah. And you've got your scent wheel and everything. So
Yep,
awesome.
got that.
Cool. Got a message recently, which originated from something that this individual saw on social media. And it kind of like made this individual think about, oh, hey, this could be a good topic for discussion on the Full Quadrant podcast. So I'll read it here. So it says that this individual saw someone on Instagram comment that quote, I believe when working in NePoPo, the way you use the collar or the e-collar is causing discomfort and is aversive, end quote. And it reminded this person how at Silver School that Bart and Michael are very clear. And we actually have an episode about this, right? We have a full quadrant episode that the e-collar or NePoPo is not just about the e-collar. It goes beyond the e-collar, right? It's you can train NePoPo with just a leash. You can train NePoPo with just body spatial pressure or any version of a mechanical tools or equipment. It's not solely dependent on utilizing electronic collars, right? Um,
Exactly.
and individual goes on to say that it sounded like there was a conflict in the understanding with this individual where they didn't believe that you can still condition the e-collar before implementing it in negative reinforcement, which led to a few questions. First being, should you condition the e-collar in NePoPo before implementing it as negative reinforcement? Number two, how do Bart and Michael recommend implementing the electronic collar? And and then three is what is the difference between conditioning an e-collar and using it for negative reinforcement based off of the comment that was seen on social media. So given those questions and that prompt, I think that makes for a good discussion for us to kind of dive into what is the e-collar, what are the applications of using the e-collar, and hopefully this helps clears up confusion about only or about the e-collar only being a tool for causing discomfort and becoming an aversive tool, as the comment was made on social media.
Yeah. So that's one of the misconceptions is that NePoPo is just about the e-collar. Yeah, like you said, but it's far from that. That's just like you said before. An e-collar is just another tool that can be implemented in the system of NePoPo,
Correct.
right? And the first thing was the conditioning of the collar, right? That was the first question, I think. And the conditioning of the collar, because people, that's the one of the problems too, is people think of the collar as only on a using it on a higher level, but they're missing out on the precision of the collar, the possibilities, because that's the one thing with the collar. It's the most precise tool you have, when it comes to tools.
Precise and consistent.
Yes. And like I said, I think posted somewhere or I commented somewhere. It's like if the modern e-collar is because has a range of stem from very low to very high, and because it can be used at a distance, right? You don't have to be connected to your dog physically with a leash or some kind of other, thing. It's the most precise tool to communicate with your dog in many different ways. But going back to the conditioning, the the one thing that I've heard a lot is that conditioning the e-collar, which where they add it. I think you mentioned they add it with the mechanical tools to like behaviors. Conditioning to most people is using it as negative reinforcement with the commands that the dog knows behavior. So they tell the dog to sit, they start the stem, the dog sits, they release the stem. That is what they call conditioning, but because they're doing it on a lower level, they're calling it conditioning.
Yeah.
But conditioning for us is where you come out, the dog doesn't know what the stem means, and where you stem, pause, and then reward, either with food or with you can do it with food, you can do it with a toy, right? So that you condition the e-collar stem on a low level, whatever the lowest, the dog feels, to mean a reward is coming. So that's the stem leads to a reward. But you can do the same thing with a pinch collar,
Right.
right? You can do the same thing with a slip or with a flat collar. You can do the same thing with the healing sticks, right? But it's that the pressure leads to a reward. That's the first step. It's not adding it to the sit or the down or the here or the place or the heel or anything like that. It's pressure leads to reward,
Right.
right? That's conditioning.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're right, and I agree with everything you said. It's interesting when you run into comments like this on social media, it's you always have to go back to the definition, right? Because this individual who says that, oh, in NePoPo, the e-collar is only used and conditioned to cause discomfort and to be an aversive tool, right? Again, the quote was, believe when working in NePoPo, the way you use the e-collar is for sure causing discomfort and is aversive. That individual's definition of it shows a gap in their understanding about negative reinforcement, because negative reinforcement does not have to be painful. Contrary to what some other trainers say, it doesn't have to be painful. It just has to be motivating, right? And motivating is not necessarily painful. Like, if you change the temperature in my bedroom from like 72 degrees to 3 degrees up, 75 degrees, that might be too hot for me to sleep comfortably, and I might take a blanket off, right? I might do something. I might be motivated to do something as a result. Doesn't mean you made my room 100 degrees, you know, in order to
Where
get
it
me to
became
do that. It's
aversive.
there's
Yeah.
a minimum level that can cause and initiate a cause to action, right? And
That's where it's the same as if something is bothering you on your skin, right? On your arm.
right,
which motivates you to like move it away, but it is not at a level that's painful yet,
Yeah. The itch
right?
that
But
needs
it
to be
does motivate
scratched.
you to get it off. Like the best example is like a piece, you know, when you have like, because I don't have any hair, right? But my wife has long hair. So if I have a piece of her hair on me,
It tickles.
right? It's like I can feel it. I want to get it off. It's annoying, but it's not painful,
Right.
right? It motivates me to try to find it and get it off, but it is not at the point where it's aversive. And I think that the person that made the quote, I think it shows you one of two things. Either they've never used the e-collar, so they view it as only an aversive tool, right? Or they
Right.
have used an e-collar, but they've only used it as a aversive tool.
Right.
So it shows you their, you know, their feeling of how something is used, and they haven't explored its full use, I think.
Right. And it shows, again, it shows the narrowness of their understanding to assume that the only thing that's motivating to an individual has to be at a painful level, because
Mm-hmm.
you need to take a step back and take in a wider scope or a wider view perspective to assimilate information that there are allowances where lower level stimulus can create and precipitate action
Yeah,
on someone's part, right?
because the dog knows, hey, this stim, when it stops, a reward is coming,
Right.
right? So now it does want the stim to stop, but not necessarily because it's something that's uncomfortable, but because it leads to something it wants.
Right. I mean, it's not to say that pain cannot be a good motivator. You can use pain, and in certain cases, you must use pain, right? Going back to like animal welfare law, but it's not exclusively reserved for high levels of, pressure.
Yes, that's right.
And that needs to be understood, and that shows a glaring gap in the understanding of theory of learning of behavior and learning theory in that individual, which again, they may be an honest person and they may be trying to accumulate as much information as they can, or they might be someone who is kind of shutting the door to half of what's out there, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
only operating within certain quadrants, and they're not willing to accept or you know acknowledge the efficacy of the other 50% of how nature learns, right?
Yeah. But I also, though, there are some e-collars out there that the lowest level is also already kind of high,
Also true.
right?
Yes, also true.
So it depends on what, and that's that's why the technology comes in,
Right.
and the quality of the collar and the range of it, you
Yep.
know.
So, lest we rehash and basically re-record our previous episodes into this episode for episode 13, let's jump straight to some examples of maybe some applications of the collar that might be helpful to people who are trying to learn how maybe they're stuck. Maybe the way they've been using the collar is not effective for their dog or a dog that they're training. Let's what are so
Yeah.
there's a good
Well, that was the
number.
second question, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of leads into that. So,
Right.
what was the second question? Can you read that again?
Yeah. So the second one said, how do Bart and Michael recommend implementing the e-collar? And in parentheses mentioned, I think there were 8 or 9 applications of the e-collar that were mentioned at Silver School. So I think it would be good to talk about those, and because
Yeah.
those are great ideas to, if you've run into a dead end with your dog and the e-collar, there are some other ways that you can creatively use that tool to maybe potentially overcome a roadblock.
Yes. So yeah, the first one, and it's always the same from my first silver school to the ones that are now, was to you can use the e-collar to cut the drive. You know, but what does that mean?
Expound on that for the audience.
Cut the drive is like it's basically like stop doing anything, like stop everything you're doing. Where the dog is, it's one of the things that when people talk about the uses of the e-collar, that's probably one of the misused ways of using the e-collar, right?
It's used
Because cut the
and
drive,
misunderstood.
yeah, which I don't, that is kind of, I think to use that, there's not too many dogs you would use that on
Right.
because we are always trying to build drives in the
Yeah.
dog,
Right.
right? But we're not trying to cut the drive. And the cut the drive is it's different than what people would say like negative reinforcement training. It's like it is really like taking the drive out of the dog
Yep.
where it doesn't want to do um, pretty much anything. Is that what you would say? Or
Yeah. So cut the drive is like stopping a behavior. It's like a brake pedal action on the dog where you're trying to diminish the dog's drive for a specific behavior or a specific outcome. The example Bart used in the last in-person silver school in March was the dog that chases the neighbor's cat. You use the collar to cut that dog's drive for chasing the cat, but he also, mentioned it's important to understand that, if the dog doesn't understand where that's coming from, he might attribute the pressure or the level of discomfort and make that association with the thing he's chasing, and it might make him more aggressive towards that thing or behavior, which could be problematic.
yeah,
Especially if in the situation where you then turn it off before the dog actually cuts its drive, and now the dog has been strengthened in chasing and it's been made more aggressive into that direction.
yes. And the thing with cut the drive though, usually it's not as much in the stopping one behavior as it is in stopping like just general bullshit, right?
Right.
Like just stop, the stuff you're doing. So and it is, yeah, of course, when if something is used incorrectly, it can have other, outcomes. And that's why, and the thing with cut to drive is it has to be a high level where it's close to number two, I think, in the uses of the e-collar.
Which is essentially the use of aversive stim for punishment of a specific behavior.
Correct. And that's the difference. It's hard to differentiate, but the difference aversive stim is to stop one single behavior with high level discomfort,
Right.
right? Whereas the cut the drive is not necessarily for one single behavior.
More of the dog's state of being, right? Is it too
Yeah,
active, right? You're trying to bring the activity level down in all
yeah,
areas of life.
yeah. And that's why it's not really, you know, used that much
Right.
because we want more direct, like pointing the dog to something. So number two, aversive stim, and that is to stop one single behavior, and the dog is allowed to do anything it wants after that.
Yep.
Right.
Stop doing one thing in favor of anything else the dog could possibly do.
Yep. The easiest example for that is the dog is digging in the yard. The moment the dog starts digging, it will feel that high level of discomfort. And then once it stops, the discomfort stops.
Right.
So that it equates that discomfort with its behavior it was doing.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And the only thing to turn that off is to stop digging.
Right. And I like the added detail that you share with the aversive uses, where you say that the aversive pressure must continue beyond the discontinuation of the unwanted behavior so that there's no chance the dog misunderstands that there was anything but stopping that behavior that turns off the pressure, right? You want him to be well on to something, some other behavior, and then when the pressure gets turned off in the moment of that other behavior, that's the key to the dog's escape from that
Yeah,
pressure.
correct. Well, and that's the if you look at mistakes, one mistake is what you just said. If if the stim stops before the digging stops, right, then like you said, the dog could think the digging, the
Is
continuation of digging stopped the stim.
right.
And that's why you don't want to time it to exactly when the digging stops. You want to do it
Maybe there's
a
a
little bit after. So
yeah,
that stopping the digging caused the stim to stop,
right.
right? Oh, the other thing is it has to you if you're going to do that, you have to do it every time the dog digs,
Yeah.
right?
Hand of God style, right? Spontaneous punishment.
Yeah. And the thing with aversive stim is you don't speak, you
Yes,
know.
that again, hand of God. It comes from the sky.
Yep.
It's lightning from the sky. It's always present every time he thinks about digging and puts his paw into the grass. It happens. And then, it's
Yep. And the other mistake I believe that happens is that people try to gauge exactly how much is enough stim.
right. They don't want to,
You yeah, you can't try to go on that line. You can't try to, tight walk tightrope walk that line, right? You have to go higher
you're
than what
killing
you
an
think,
ant with a sledgehammer.
right? Exactly. And and the reason for that is one is you don't want it to be where the dog is like, you know what, last time I felt like stopping, but I'll risk it again because I
Yes,
want to dig.
right.
You want it to go like, I don't want to feel that
There's
again.
no question. I don't want to do that again. That was the bad choice. And
Yeah,
that's where it informs future behavior.
correct. And if you go higher in the beginning, you will have to do it less in the future.
Correct. And you can even operate at a lower level in the future because they know there's potential for higher down the road if you do that.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you won't have to
Right.
because it'll be like, I don't want to dig
Yeah. Yep.
anymore.
I mean, it's the same, it's the same thing you eat at a restaurant, you get the stomach bug. Most people will never go back to that restaurant again because it was such an aversive experience. It's not worth the risk is not worth the
I
reward.
had I had that recently
Oh no.
with not with a restaurant though, but
Food truck tacos?
it it wasn't food poisoning. I think I might have had like something COVID or something, but because I never throw up.
Yeah.
Like it's very difficult for me to throw up ever from sickness or from, like alcohol if you drink too much. I I can I can go without throwing. I can control myself, right? But what happened is that morning I ate a specific type of food that I usually don't eat. And then later I got sick, but it was not food poisoning because I've had food poisoning before. I know how it is. And then I threw up a few times later. But then the next day, I thought about eating that same thing, but it was associated with that feeling of being sick. So I did not want to eat it.
Right.
And that lasted like for a few days, the association,
Yeah.
right? Even though it wasn't direct.
It's a powerful, I mean, in the end, punishment is not about the pain that comes, it's about the memory of the event, right? Because I mean, you mentioned that study that said electronic shock does not leave like it does not.
Emotional scars.
Yes, it doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't leave those scars. It's just the memory of, wow, that was a really bad decision. I'm not going to risk that again, right? It's the
Yep.
cognitive memory that informs the behavior that, hey, last time I did this, I really didn't enjoy life that much. I'm going to skip it,
Yep.
which
Exactly.
which kind of leads into the next use of the e-collar is, and it's discussed in the school as avoidance training, but to be more specific, it's escape avoidance training, otherwise known as negative reinforcement training,
Yep.
utilizing the e-collar, because in the beginning, you introduce pressure so that the dog learns how to get away from pressure. And you do it at a low level so that he can still think. Because if you're getting a lot of pressure, your ability to think diminishes as the pressure increases.
Correct. That's the difference, I believe, with NePoPo and other ways people use it. is that that's why we do low, is so that the dog understands how to turn it off
Yes.
before we go to the higher levels. Because then once he understands how to turn it off and you go to the higher levels, now there's less feeling of like what is going on.
Yeah, they're not frantic. They
Yep,
feel more in control of their own destiny with when they get pressure,
correct.
not helpless.
But I saw that in my first in because we do the role playing games, right?
Mhm.
In silver. The new in the when we did the silver in the 5 day school, especially like Bart and Michael do the role games now, but you can't have as many people participate as
Abbreviated, right? It's very, very
right.
condensed.
But we did it. But I remember we had the tone on too, and it was two students were doing it, and with it was more of e shaping. But I remember the person that was doing the e collar, the tone, he was holding it down, and the other person got confused. And what did they do? They just stopped. And that was because we went straight in. There was no learning phase in our role game there. It was just jump right into it and try to get the person who was the dog, right? To shape them to do something with the e-collar. But that was the point, is when you don't have a learning phase, the dog can get stuck and they don't know what to do. And what happens with a lot of dogs? That's what happens. They just freeze,
Right.
right? And they don't freeze necessarily because it's too high. They just freeze because they don't know what to do,
Right.
right?
Yep. And again, the value of starting at low level with negative reinforcement, otherwise known as escape, right? You introduce pressure so that the dog can learn to get away from it, aka escape. Once the dog knows how to escape it down the road, he'll understand how to avoid that situation that caused the pressure, right? So if he took too long to sit, or if he took too long to go back to his place or to the crate, he made the association that pressure comes 1, 2, 3 seconds later. So now he acts faster in order to avoid the pressure that would come if he was slow enough, right? And hence the name escape training, which evolves into the avoidance training of the punishment or the use of punishment.
Yep, exactly. Because you've conditioned it also in the beginning to mean a reward is coming, now the hope stays high and they're like, oh yeah, I know how to turn this off and I know that a reward is coming afterwards. And that's why in level one we always reward, because that's the level we're using the negative reinforcement and then rewarding every time. So
Totally.
the hope stays high, they understand how to turn it off. And then when it starts getting a little spicy, they're like, oh, they're trying, it's a game to beat it.
Totally. Yeah.
Right?
And I think it's important to know that like there's a lot of common applications on pairing the e-collar to a dog, or they call it conditioning the e-collar to the dog. But I think sometimes certain methods don't always work with every single dog. And so sometimes people run into problems and then they just think, oh, I just need to go higher or higher or higher, right? And then that's where they start seeing more and more behaviors go awry in their use of the e-collar, and they think, oh, e-collars are bad because it made my dog do this and that. Well, it's not that the e-collar was bad, it's that the method the e-collar was being used for was not
Was
right.
not perfect for that dog, that particular dog.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, which leads us to the contact method.
Yeah. So the contact method is a method to use on a dog that already knows the behaviors well.
Typically, and to add detail to that, it's generally a dog that's been trained in popo style training.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So a dog that's been trained in Popo, it knows the behaviors, it has motivation for the behaviors, and now you want to add the e-collar to those behaviors. What you do is you do it as a nick, like a momentary, a tap with the command. So the dog knows how to sit when you say sit. It's motivated to sit. Now you add the e-collar. When you say sit, you tap. But you do it with every single command the dog knows, because you don't want that to lead to another use of the e-collar.
Right, right.
Um,
And the
But
goal of
yeah,
contact method is that you can take a dog who's been trained in popo foundations, meaning positive only training, right? They've only had treats. The punishment that they've ever received is probably either ending the session or withholding the reward, right? There's been no physical or mechanical pressure on the dog. They don't understand that language. And jumping into it, so using contact method, it allows you to teach the dog to how to understand and deal with the sensation from the e-collar without losing the benefits of the popo foundation. And then
yeah,
now you've introduced and added the e-collar as a tool to eventually use as a correction when they fail to
yes,
do.
yeah. That's I think, and that's what most people. That's the mistake that most people make is that, like you talked about language, is they teach in the Popo language, and then they all of a sudden try to correct with a different language, right? Which is the
Yeah.
pressure. But and the contact method lets you bridge the gap between those two.
Bart gave a great example at the school where he and Michael were talking, and he's like, "Yeah, a correction or communication in a language that so communication in a language that you do not understand is always perceived as aversive. For example, someone comes up to you on the street and starts loudly screaming at you in Russian, right? You're gonna think they're like cussing you out or something like that. Where in reality, they might be saying, "Hey, watch out for the bus. The bus is about to hit you," right? And they're trying to help you out. Or they might be saying, "Hey, how are you?" or something like that. But because you don't understand their communication, it's perceived as aversive. But when you
Correct. And
understand,
that's
right?
exactly. And that's why when you teach in one language with positive reinforcement and then try to correct using some kind of pressure, that pressure language is not understood.
Right.
It's like you teach in English, but then try to correct in Spanish.
Yeah.
And the contact method lets you bridge the gap.
Right.
So, which what they say, you're preparing the dog for the correction that will never inevitably come,
Right.
but you're teaching the language of the correction, so the dog understands when you give the correction what it means and what to do.
Yep. So it doesn't leave itself distraught or feeling shut down.
Correct, because it doesn't understand the language.
Right. Yep. Now to the application that I was describing is probably the most common use of how to condition how people in dog training use to condition a dog to an e-collar, which is the pairing of an e-collar to a mechanical tool, whether that's a leash on a flat or a prong collar or maybe a slip collar. You start doing that. You layer the e-collar on top of the feedback that you deliver mechanically to the dog, and then eventually you fade the mechanical away, and now you're just running the dog on E, and now the dog has learned to understand that E pressure in that context now has the same meaning as it would if you were using the mechanical tools.
Yeah, so that the people will use like a slip, pinch collar, or something, or a flat collar along to that it means something to the dog as far as behaviors go,
Right.
right? So like the sit to pull up on the leash to make the dog sit, or to pull on the leash forward to make the dog come to you, or a slight pull forward to make the dog stand, or a slight pull down to make the dog lay down. Um, or also, if you go to the NePoPo like tactile pressure, you can same thing, right? If you teach tactile pressure, like one of the videos I made where pressure on the shoulders means down, pressure on the belly means stand, and pressure on the butt means sit. You can pair the e-collar to that so the dog understands what it means, but and also pair it to the leash pulling up or the leash pulling forward. And that is teaching the dog a language, the new language of the e-collar to the old language that understands of the tools, the other tools. But that goes kind of to the escape training too, right? It's kind of overlaps with that because if you're going to keep the pressure on the leash the whole time until the dog sits, then the e-collar stem has to stay on the whole time until the dog sits.
Yes. And thinking about it, if you're thinking about it from the dog's perspective, when they feel pressure, like electric pressure paired with mechanical pressure, which eventually fades away, the mechanics fade away, the dog is interpreting the pressure of the e-collar to say, do what I told you to do before the pressure came, right? It typically means that you didn't do the thing that immediately preceded what they were doing before pressure came. So if you say sit, dog doesn't sit, you leash pressure up and then stim, pull the dog up. Eventually it turns into you say sit, dog doesn't sit, then you get it on the e-collar. The pressure from the e-collar is like, hey buddy, you didn't do it. Do the last known command that you were cued to do. And that's what pressure is being processed in the mind of the dog. They feel that pressure like, okay, what was the last thing I was told to do? I got to do that one thing, right?
Yep.
That's how the
Yes.
dogs perceive it.
Yeah. It should be the whatever I told you is going to turn off the pressure.
Yes. And this method is the pairing of e-collar to mechanical tools is valuable because E in and of itself does not deliver directional feedback to the dog. It's only after you contextualize it with a verbal cue or a picture that the dog is more likely to understand direction from the e-collar.
I would say it, I think to be more precise, it doesn't give the direction that you are intending. Because what happens if you put an e-collar on a dog that's never felt it before? They're going to move away from that
Well,
pressure,
yes,
right?
yes. There. So
So that's just a little nuance. I mean,
yes, I mean, yes, that is a true point. But I think, I mean, in the general scheme of things, for what we're talking about, it doesn't introduce the pressure you or the direction you want. But yeah, like, and so for example, like one thing that I use, like when I'm working sport dogs, this is kind of going back to one of our earlier podcasts. But one of the things I use is, there's something called opposition reflex, right? I think that was episode 2 of the full Quadrant podcast. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. It's a great episode. But opposition reflex. A lot of people use leash mechanical pressure to initiate opposition reflex. I do it with E pressure. Like most people on the heeling, they put the box on the neck where they want to push the dog into the handler's side. But if you really want to make the dog addicted to keeping their like a contact position or like a certain position, push them away from it and they have to fight through it to come back to it. So you can utilize electricity to initiate opposition reflex, and it can be a very good tool. You just have to know, what your end goal is and know what's going to happen and then work within those constructs accordingly. And you can get some really awesome results. That's how I use opposition reflex in my heeling. And it's worked really well for me.
and that's one thing with like tools, right? The chameleon. With the chameleon, because it has the islands, if you put a contact point on two separate islands on the left and a contact point on two separate islands of the right, now the dog is going to feel from both sides.
It's balanced.
So it'll be balanced. So it's not going to be like a box, which is only on one side
Right.
or the other.
Right.
That's one thing with the chameleon too, which people don't talk about much.
Yeah. And you can manipulate, you can adjust it, and it's really like, and the other thing is they can't get away from it. If they get away from one side, like some dogs know that if you have a single box here and you tilt your neck, you break the circuitry and you no longer feel the stem. But if you've got two here, you break one circuit, you're still going to feel it over here.
Yeah, because it actually connects multiple ways. So can't get you always feel it. Um, Going back to what we said too, where the thought that automatic using the e-collar is automatically aversive, right? And then what I said about some e-collar brands are high just from the get-go, right?
Right.
Even the lowest level is kind of high.
Mm-hmm.
That's the other thing with Chameleon is you could put, you could put actually what, like 9 contact points on each side, which would diminish even the lowest level, which is
Right.
already low,
Right.
right? So you could go on even a very sensitive dog, you could go down to the level where it barely feels it.
Yep.
You know, cool.
Yep. That's yeah, good point. So far we've covered the uses of the e-collar that we've covered have been cut the drive, meaning bringing the total state of the dog down a notch or two, right? You don't like their entire energy level. And it's not a recommended use, but it is a use. It comes with it comes with a caution tag attached to it, right? Be user beware. The second one being aversive stim, right? Corrective or sorry,
Just
punishment
a,
for singular behaviors.
yep, yep.
Moving on to
Three
three
is
being
the escape. We call it avoidance, but it's actually like escape and avoidance, right? Or escape training, which is a negative reinforcement.
yep. We just reviewed
Uh,
contact method training.
yep. Contact method, a tap with the command that the dog already knows, or with
Yep.
the cue that the dog
Single
already knows.
single electronic tap, nothing else. E with the cue. E with the cue, E with the cue on a dog that's been trained in purely positive or positive methodologies. Um,
Yep.
has no former understanding of what mechanical pressure means. The fifth one we
Or
just covered is the pairing of E to mechanical tools. So your e-collar is it's you're basically classically conditioning e-collar to whatever the mechanics are of the tools that you're using, essentially. And that brings us to our next utilization of an application of the e-collar, which is deaf dog training, right?
mhm.
Do you want to talk? Do you
Deaf
want to talk
dog
about
training,
that?
huh?
Have you done training with a deaf dog on e-collar before?
Yeah,
Yeah, they're
I
few and
did.
far between, but they're out there.
There's different way. There's a few different ways people use them, and you pretty much, I think it's like you pretty much have like three
You're limited.
commands,
Yeah.
right? You can have a short stem, like a tap,
Tap. Yep.
means something.
Nick,
You
constant.
can have a long, constant tap, or some people use like a long tapping,
Yep.
like constant tapping to mean one thing, and then you can have the vibrate to mean something also.
So for me, vibrate when I've done, and the last deaf dog I trained was the dog's name was Donut, super cute dog. A nice couple had this dog. I use the vibrate as the marker to come back to me
Okay.
and get reward. So that's what I liked the vibrate for was the vibrate was come to me, get your reward. I used it as the
So,
clicker. That was that deaf
so,
dog's clicker.
so it became a clicker, but it also evolved into a recall,
Recall too.
basically, right?
Exactly. Yep.
Hmm.
And then if the dog didn't come when called, then I would start getting on the stem and the dog would come back, right?
So what did you use? Did you use each one separately, or
Yeah.
like did you
So
use?
if my memory serves me right, with donuts, the constant pressure was a downstay, was down. The nick was sit, and the vibrate was the marker and the recall. And then with the Martin System brand, you can actually get a little bit more creative because they have different a few extra programs for stim. You can have rising or you can have falling, right? And so the recall can also be you can utilize the decreasing stim or diminishing stim as the recall too, because you start high if you recall, well, you can't verbally recall the dog. So if you vibrate the dog doesn't come, you get on your diminishing stim, and as the dog is coming, they're getting less and less stim as they come to you. So it's more of a positive experience to come close to you.
There's different ways you can do it, and it's just
Yeah,
limited by your creativity
yeah, exactly. And
and
it's
and
all
the
about
tools you have.
yeah, it's all about training for the client, right? What are they going to be capable of and what do they need?
Yeah. But that's the thing. You should definitely have a recall. You should definitely have a down.
Yep, a downstay.
And then the other one, your sit is basically for a deaf dog, especially, your sit is the same as look at me, right?
Right.
Because so then the they have to look at you for them to give you for you to give them a command of
Right.
a hand signal,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So yeah, that's but then that's the thing, then you're kind of limited um with that because of the dog not being able to hear, so you can't
Yeah. And it
add
was
it to all.
interesting. It was interesting because this dog in particular, it was deaf and it was very nervous. So if you
Oh
walked in the
man,
room, if you walked into the room and it didn't notice you were there and it turned around, it would literally jump off the floor because it got startled. Like it's like, where did you come from? Right? Because it doesn't hear you
you
coming into
can't
the
hear.
room. Yeah. Yeah. It was a really cool dog. But yeah, we trained it and I mean, the owners had a really, it was great because that dog was a flight risk. The problem was the dog was so fleety. Like it would get startled at any little sight, any little movement, anything that came up from behind, it would just take off because it was such a nervous dog. And so to layer in the e-collar gave them that distance, that long distance leash to control their dog.
Nice.
But yeah, deaf dog training is another application of the e-collar.
What was next?
Next one, separation anxiety. Do you want to describe that one?
Well, we didn't originally have that in our the first school. I remember what, but it was in the next one I went to, and then they always talk about it every school after that, I think. But it's classical conditioning where you pair the low level signal of the e-collar to your touch that has a calming effect on the dog, right? So basically, if you have your dog that may be anxious when you leave or whatever, and you touching the dog is what calms the dog down. So what you do classically is you're going to pair the stim, associate the stim with you petting the dog. Right? So that would just be basically you stim and then pet the dog. Stim and then pet the dog. Not continuous. You just want it to become a signal. But you could keep it, longer. But usually, if I do that, I just do like a. It's not just a quick tap, but it's just so the dog feels it.
Right. Yep. And then once that becomes conditioned to the dog, then as you leave, when the dog starts to kind of spin up a little bit, you tap, the dog feels that. And if it's been classically conditioned correctly, the dog should feel those same emotions that come with the paired praise and verbal contact, or sorry, not verbal, but physical contact.
Yeah, that's the key because classical conditioning just does I can't even speak. It doesn't just pair two signals. It also gives the emotional feelings, right, of
The
those
state in the
signals
moment.
or
Yes.
state. Yeah.
I mean, yes, absolutely, because it's the physiological response that happens as a result of that stimuli, right? Like that's why the dogs were salivating is because the bell preceded the side of the food and the side of the food caused the salivation. And so the bell took on that meaning. So you absolutely can condition a physiological response if you've done it well.
Yeah, that is correct.
A lot of these do have crossover and there's a lot of similarities between some of these, but they all kind of start in the same place, but they kind of branch out into different directions when you get to the end results.
Yes, definitely. And that's the thing is knowing the uses so that you can apply them the way you need,
Yes.
right, in the moment.
Yep. Giving you more tools in your toolbox so that when you run into the dog that makes you scratch your head, you have more to go off of than just the industry standard of like add e-collar on top of leash pressure, right?
Yep. And then the last one is e-shaping. So what is e-shaping?
E-shaping is essentially it's your method of communicating to your sole method of communicating with the dog to let them know It's kind of like a game of Marco Polo, right? Like, or hot and cold, right? You know, you walk away from the target behavior, you get colder, you start to feel the pressure. You come closer, there's no pressure, right? And then you kind of guide the direction of the dog into the behavior you want, which is ideally shaping, right? You're shaping with the electric stim that the dog feels.
Yeah. And like you said, that's the only communication that the dog is getting. The only feedback that it's getting is the stim. And again, you should do it on a lower level so that the dog is, like you said earlier, able to think and able to say, okay, what is this communicating to me? What do I have to do?
Right. It should be at a level that is noticeable and motivating enough that it's like the way I describe it is moderately annoying, mildly uncomfortable. That's the appropriate level for e-shaping where it motivates them to do something because they'd rather not sit there and feel this nagging pressure, but it's also not uncomfortable where they can't think clearly to solve problems that you're presenting to the dog. And that's the level that gives you the a very good outcome because if the level is not motivating enough, then they'll just sit there all day and it's not going to cause them to do anything about it. So you have to have it at a level that creates action.
Yeah. And I think the higher the level that's used, the more experienced the handler has to be,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't, somebody inexperienced should not go on a higher level trying to E-shape because you're not going to get the outcome you want. Definitely.
Yes, and to if you make a mistake or take it too far, the risks, like I mean, the damages that come from that can be really hard to work through. Not that they can't be overcome, because a good trainer can overcome bad training, but it just sets you back a few paces in your path, and everybody wants to avoid that. It does take some master coaching to be able to know how far to go or to what level is the proper dosage going to be applied at.
Correct. And
Right.
if you've done the silver school or if you are thinking about taking it, Jason and I do have our gold school coming up in Texas, Edinburgh, Texas, at Canines.
In action.
What was Marty's place? Canines in Action, right?
Canines in Action LLC.
I wanted to say Canines. Yeah, Canines in Action. Nice place.
Yeah, really cool facility.
Yep. And that'll be beginning of October,
Yes. Yep.
October
October.
7th. Yep.
Hopefully far enough into the year that it's not super hot, but also still comfortable and good dog training weather. But it doesn't matter because he's got a super indoor facility. So
Yep.
yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, if you guys have questions, you can always reach out to us. If you can, you can leave comments on this episode. And if we miss something, let us know,
If you think we missed
right?
something.
Or, huh?
If you think we missed something, we'll tell you why you're
Yeah.
wrong.
No,
No, actually,
we'll talk through it and see, like, you know,
maybe we did.
there's
Yeah.
always new things coming up um, that,
So
you know,
actually, this makes
that's
me
dog
think,
training though, right?
right. This makes me think about there were a lot of concepts and ideas in here that were more deeply discussed in other episodes. Like we went deeper into those concepts in other episodes. So if you're tuning into this episode for your first episode, there's a lot of episodes that lead up to this one that are going to set the stage to better understand this particular subject on the use of e-collars, right?
Yep.
And how to apply them. So definitely if you're jumping in and you're joining in at episode 13, highly recommend going back and watching. Fortunately for you, we don't have 100 episodes yet, so you don't have to listen to that many, but highly recommend that you go back and listen to all the preceding episodes because they're all very instructive and informative, and we've tried to make a point to keep these very educational and deliver a lot of value. So hopefully we're hitting that target, let us know if there's other ways that we can provide better information for you. We're happy to do that. So
Yep. Exactly.
awesome. Well, that was
Perfect.
great, great conversation, Mike. Good chatting with you. And we'll pick this back up. We'll try to record again soon.
Yep. Good talking to you, Jason, and I want to meet that puppy soon.
Yeah, he's a good little puppy. He's still a little sleepy because actually, yeah, we got him. He's still young, so still a little sleepy. But I think he's going to turn out to be a really nice dog. Really looking forward to it.
Awesome.
So, all right. Well, hey, thanks
Great.
everybody. Appreciate you tuning in to episode 13 of the Full Quadrant podcast. We'll see you next time.
Yep. See you then.